In a recent article posted, and I have talked about this extensively, it says the World Health Organization warns of false positives, of course, in conjunction with the disease test. It says some patients might not truly be infected. And it's like, duh. Many people have talked about the tests that are done, the PCR tests, or even the rapid BD test that I spoke of in numerous videos where many of the tests were showing false positive. There was a video that I did where some 77 NFL players had tested positive, and of course, as a result, they retested all these individuals, and all of them retested negative. And so for many of you people who have put much faith in your doctors or in these tests, I see these people every single day when I come home from the hospital, and there's a long line stretched around the corner at the City MD located not too far away from me here in Manhattan. And these people basically are getting tested. They're utilizing the same sort of PCR and BD tests, and many of these tests have been faulty. They have been from the very beginning. And of course, now that Orange Man Bad has basically been moved out of the office, now you're going to hear of more of this information. If you haven't, and so this article comes out yesterday on the 22nd, and it says the World Health Organization is warning that widely deployed technology used to test for the disease may, if interpreted incorrectly, lead at least some patients to believe that they had the virus when in fact they are not truly infected. And so for many of you, you might remember the whole, what did they refer to it as? Asymptomatic spread, right? And so many of these individuals who, of course, were testing positive, as the test has a high false positive rate. And so, of course, as a result, many of these individuals who had absolutely no symptoms were subsequently testing positive. And then, of course, the narrative was that you now have asymptomatic spread, even though Dr. Fauci had stated in numerous other interviews that asymptomatic spread can never lead to any sort of a pandemic.
To just add one thing that seems to get lost in that question is that, as Bob said, and I agree, we would really like to see the data, because if there is asymptomatic transmission, it impacts certain policies that you do regarding screening, et cetera. But the one thing historically people need to realize, that even if there is some asymptomatic transmission, in all the history of respiratory-borne viruses of any type, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks. The driver of outbreaks is always a symptomatic person. Even if there's a rare asymptomatic person that might transmit, an epidemic is not driven by asymptomatic carriers.
Going forward, and of course you can see here the World Health Organization notice for IVD users, and of course this is 2020-05. This has gone fairly far back. It says the nucleic acid testing technologies that use the polymerase chain PCR for detection. And of course, it goes on to state that there is a flaw in, of course, the way that they utilize the test. And it's been that way. This is by no means something new. Even the designer of the test said that the test is inappropriately used and should not be utilized for the detection of respiratory diseases, but should be used in conjunction with symptoms that lead medical practitioners to believe that it could be this particular disease. So it goes on to state, interpreting the results from PCR tests, it says, should be aware that careful interpretation of weak positive results is needed. It says the World Health Organization alert specifically addresses a controversial aspect of the disease PCR test. It says the cycle threshold, right? So that's basically the number of times that the cycles are run. And basically what that does is basically like a magnifier. So the more cycles that you run, the bigger magnification that you get in terms of the particles that you pick up with the PCR swab. And so the World Health Organization goes on to say that the number of application cycles the test must undergo before detecting the specimen. Now, of course, originally these cycles were too high. And again, the more you cycle for amplification, the more likely you are to basically pick up anything. And so what these PCR tests were doing were basically picking up any form of the virus, whether that was even a dead cell, and of course you tested positive, whether that was in the hospital setting or whether that was basically in a clinic somewhere that you went to one of these testing sites. It says if a test must go through a high number of cycles before detecting the disease virus, it potentially indicates that the original viral specimen was weak and the patient from whom it came may not be infectious or even truly infected, as the World Health Organization put it in its most recent announcement. It goes on to state, disease prevalence alerts the predictive value of the test results. A disease prevalence decrease, the risk of false positive increases. This means that the probability that a person who has a positive detection for the virus is truly infected with the virus, and of course decreases as a prevalence decreases, irrespective of the claimed specificity. And so, like I've said in numerous of the videos that I've done, that this has been the case. It's only now, of course, coming out because said individual is no longer in office. And of course, now we're going to see a shift in the way that the disease is detected. More than likely, from what I've seen, is that they will require multiple PCR swabs. They'll probably change the number of cycles and, of course, change the number of positive swabs to indicate whether a person can be considered testing positive. More than likely, they will throw out this whole thing with presumption. So if a person had a fever or anything that was considered flu-like, they don't even refer to things as flu-like in the hospital anymore. Everything I see is, disease related. So instead of flu-like, it's now this disease-like. And so basically they utilize that as an indication to state whether or not this person more than likely has this particular virus, because the flu no longer exists in the hospital setting. So moving forward, more than likely you will see, of course, the numbers start to decline. It is what it is. You fell for it, but of course, hopefully we'll start to see more people sort of become more alert to what many individuals have been saying in terms of the particular virus at hand. You'll more than likely see it change from the hospital setting, lower detection rate in terms of cases, lower hospitalizations, and of course, especially as individuals start to receive the vaccine, everything will come to basically work out as they told you. But in terms of the economic outlook, that's not going to look so great because basically you swapped out your freedom for safety. You've basically entered into a very dark period of time where individuals who should not be in positions of authority are basically wielding this newfound power that you gave them, basically to your detriment. And there are going to be hard times moving forward. Everybody was pointing to one particular individual and saying all the deaths were his fault. Now the World Health Organization is saying, no, maybe they didn't have it. Maybe they didn't have it. Now you are basically the budding end of a bad joke. With that said, we're going to have to wait and see how this is all going to play out. More than likely not going to go in a good direction. But at the very least, some people will become more awake to what's been going on. And as a result, maybe we'll see a bit of a push from the people. Highly doubt it. But kind of is what it is. Basically, what happens when you trade your freedom for would-be security, you end up with neither.